Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. Here in Washington, lots of folks think that big government and big think tanks shape policy, but all across the country, state governments and state think tanks are tackling serious problems, sometimes with remarkable success. Joining us are some of the people who are shaking things up at state and regional think tanks. From California, Sally Pipes, president of the Pacific Research Institute. From Michigan, Joseph Overton, Vice President of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. From Colorado, Phil Burgess, President of the Center for the New West. And from Massachusetts, James Peyser, Executive Director of the Pioneer Institute for Public Policy. The topic before this House: can the states do it better? This week on Think Tank. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution says that the powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. But over the past 50 or 60 years, the federal government has greatly expanded its authority at the expense of the states. The federal budget is now bigger than all state and local budgets combined. Many of the members of the new Republican majority in Congress say they want to shrink the size and role of the federal government and send power back to the states. They argue that individual states know their own special needs and can often handle tough issues like crime, healthcare, welfare, and education more efficiently than one-size-fits-all federal programs. In the states, the revolution has already begun. In Wisconsin and New Jersey, tough new laws limit benefits to welfare recipients. Because of this, New Jersey saw a 13% drop in illegitimate births to welfare mothers, and Wisconsin has reduced its welfare rolls by 25% at a time when the number of welfare recipients was increasing nationally by 30%. In Michigan, the state legislature slashed property taxes and instead funded public schools with a small increase in the sales tax. And in Massachusetts, annual Medicaid costs were growing 19% per year. State health care reforms cut the increase to only 5% per year. These and other innovations have some states on the cutting edge of reform, but can they shoulder yet a bigger burden? And will they be able to manage social programs better than the feds, who so often seem bound in red tape a mile long? Let us begin the conversation perhaps once around the horn with a short answer to the central question that we're dealing with today. Why should the states play a more active role than they are now, and the federal government a less active role?
In the recent elections, both at the federal and the state levels, we have seen a reduction in people's views. The voters rejected big government. It's time to turn that power of spending taxpayers' dollars to the states, because the states can manage their funds much better than a central bureaucracy in Washington.
All right, Jim Peyser of the Pioneer Institute for Public Policy.
You know, I think there's frequently a combining of small government with federalism. And I'm not sure that's always the case. I think perhaps more important, especially to governors, is the flexibility and accountability that comes with having control over the management of the programs. And I think a lot of governors are looking at not so much cutting the programs as much as taking over responsibility for managing them. And I think the assumption is that that will produce efficiency gains, but also that there will be programmatic benefits.
All right, my old friend Phil Burgess from the Center for the New West, headquartered in Denver.
Well, Ben, I think there are three reasons. One is when the Founding Fathers set up the national government, it had two parts to it, a central government and a state government. That's been corrupted over the years, especially since the Civil War. We've begun to think of the federal government as the government and the states as administrative units. That really overlooks some of the tremendous assets that we have. The second reason is that almost all the innovation in public management since World War II has happened in state government, whether it's legislatures, executives, or the reform of judiciaries. The third reason is that state governments are closer to the people, and we live in a large, heterogeneous society. One size fits all doesn't work. The answer to illegal immigration in California may be very different from the answer in Arizona, and we don't need people from Washington coming out and telling us how to do it.
How are we going to make a living? No, all right, next, Joe Overton of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy.
Well, Ben, my first response would be, given the record of the federal government in the last 30 years, what makes us believe that the federal government can be involved in really meeting the needs that our citizens in Michigan have. I think your initial comment about the principle of federalism embodied in the Constitution was one that was well analyzed and discussed at this country's founding. I agree with Phil. We know our people, and it's not a greater burden. We are already doing the work, whether it be through unfunded mandates that we're trying to be responsive to, or whether it's through receiving funding for programs where our hands are tied at actually implementing those programs. We are doing the work in the states. What we want is more flexibility, and we want more ability to keep that money in our own state.
But, Joe, you mentioned, put a time frame on it, the last 30 years, and you sort of cast asparagus on the federal government. The previous 30 years, the reason this power migrated to Washington was the states were regarded as, I think with some merit in certain cases, as either racially segregated or corrupt. I mean, you had vast numbers of scandals at the state level. Is that correct history, and has that changed?
Well, first of all, I mean, if you're talking about civil rights, that's only one very small component about what the federal government is involved in today. Do we have regulation of industry and commerce well beyond the authority in the Interstate Commerce Clause? We have regulation of we have banking and insurance law. I mean, many of these areas have nothing to do with those basic civil rights questions in my first response. And secondly, I think in many states we're dealing with those issues. And today in Michigan, for example, we have redundant civil rights legislation that we deal with both at the state and federal level.
Ben, I think the reason why power came to Washington was because of an economic crisis, not because there was a loss of faith in the states. We were in a terrible situation in the 1930s, and power migrated to Washington. But stop and think. The progressive revolution that began 100 years ago in Omaha, Nebraska with the convention really involved innovations at the state level. The open primary, the inspection of foods, public safety and health, all the major innovations that were later adopted by the New Deal really started during a very exciting period of state government innovation from roughly 1890 until 1932.
Yeah, but after that, the innovations, Social Security, Medicare, they came from the federal government, didn't they?
But, I mean, I think your comment that the world has changed, or at least the states have changed, is very, very true. I mean, I think in the end, if you look at the sort of radical reformers of Tommy Thompson or John Engler or Bill Weld or Christine Whitman, people like that are not advocating the dismantling of the social welfare safety net that's currently administered by the federal level. They're saying, let us take responsibility for it because we can manage it better, we can be more accountable not only to the beneficiaries but also to the taxpayers. And I think the level of both responsibility and also the legal and constitutional infrastructure that's been built up over the last 30 years ensures that the states are not going to fall into the type of behavior that marked, I think, the pre-civil rights acts and pre-civil rights movements of 30, 40 years ago.
You buy that, Sally?
Yes, I do, and I think that, you know, Governor Wilson has just said in his recent election that he honors individual responsibility and he wants to reward individual opportunity by controlling programs that are offered to the people. We've been through a very difficult recession in California. We've had riots, we've had floods, we've had earthquakes, and now the state government and Governor Wilson should be able to manage the taxpayers' funds, and he's doing that by reducing taxes over 3 years by 15%, taking over welfare payments, but we have to have control at the state level and take that back from Washington.
Anybody, what are the best programs in your states or regions that are now being considered by
Could I just make just a point
Sure,
first on the idea that nobody wants to dismantle any of these programs? I don't really agree with that. I think that there are a lot of people in this country who would like to replace the safety net with a springboard. And that's going to require dismantling some programs, putting more money back into states and communities and the back pockets of individuals. I think one of the most important things to remember about the 10th Amendment that you read in the lead off to this program is you left out part of it. It's to retain powers not exercised by the federal government are retained by the states and the people. And I think there are a lot of impulses in our part of the country, in the western states anyway, for having more and more responsibilities undertaken by the civic sector, by the voluntary
Is this
sector.
the so-called war on the West that we hear about, war in the West?
Well,
or
that's
war
part
on
of it.
the
I
West,
mean,
or-
the public land, the assault on the management of public lands by Bruce Babbitt really overlooks the fact that the situation in each of the states, not even in a state, in each of the sub-regions in a state, the watersheds, differs widely from place to place.
Weren't you a big fan of Bruce Babbitt's when he was governor out there?
Well, Bruce Babbitt was a governor of 43 governors I worked for during the time. When you when somebody's a member of your board of directors, you're usually a fan of them, Ben. No, I think and Bruce Babbitt had some things I agreed with. I mean, he was one of the few Democrats that was for NAFTA, and that was a good thing, I think, and it's good that he could help lead that. But his one-size-fits-all, top-down scientific management approach to the management of public lands simply doesn't work, and that same approach can be found in HHS and elsewhere. When Bruce Babbitt says, look, come up with local solution and I will give you a waiver, why should states get on bended knee to get a waiver from an assistant secretary in HHS or even the secretary of the Department of the Interior? What we have today is a mainframe government in a PC world, and what we have to do is to understand the American federal system is tailor-made for a PC world.
If I might just
Go ahead.
carry that one
Sure.
step further, I think just to use your computer analogy here, with the mainframe may be the federal government, but the states are often the mini computers, and I think getting down to the PC, which may be the city government, municipal government, county government, may in fact be the more important endpoint for this devolution of power from the federal government. And states are just as capable of creating mandates, funded or unfunded, as the federal government is.
On the local municipalities.
Absolutely.
I would
mean,
like
if
to
you ask a mayor.
I think one issue that really hits home to us at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy is the issue of social assistance. I think it's one program that can't be solved by the federal government sending a check to a low-income family in Michigan. It can't even be solved by Lansing, our capital city, sending a check to people. We need to have people working with people in those programs. We need to begin to rekindle a sense of voluntarism, responsibility of private or nonprofit organizations, churches, to be involved in that at the local level where they can know people,
Give me some
keep them accountable, and help them.
Give me some specifics of what has happened in Michigan.
Well,
In the last few years. I guess Governor Engler has made a big deal about what he's been able to do at the state level.
Right, exactly right. In fact, I think Governor Engler now is really taking the lead among the nation's governors to help reform federal legislation to allow more flexibility, bringing money back in the form of block grants, perhaps as a first step.
What is the single best example that you would, I mean, we have people out there that don't, including me, that don't quite follow all of this.
Okay, one good example is, right now, just to give you background on the problem, is that although the federal government dictates that we will help people, we don't have the flexibility in the state of Michigan to determine how we'll actually be distributing those funds. Our hands are tied. We've applied for waivers and have received waivers for a program that the governor calls Work First. This program requires that any individual receiving public assistance who is able-bodied spend 20 hours a week either working or seeking job training or involved in job training programs.
Did you get the waiver from the feds?
We did receive that, and I think that's one thing that we can at least give credit to the Clinton administration for, that they have been supportive for most of these waivers.
What are the best examples that you can think of that are happening, in your case, I guess, Sally, in California?
We are seeing changes in AFDC, requesting block grants, getting people 2.5 years and you're out if you're able-bodied, encouraging people to be work dependent, not dependent upon welfare.
So that welfare plan, 2.5 years and you're out, that's already in effect, despite the fact that they're debating this federally now.
Right. So we have to get that removed. Another thing is we passed Proposition 187 in California, which means that illegal immigrants are not entitled to welfare benefits such as health, education and general welfare. Now, this is being battled in the courts right now, but the feds mandate that we pay illegal immigrants for these services. And this is costing the California taxpayers over $3 billion a year. That is not fair. We should be able to determine who is getting funds, who is in our state. And if we cut welfare, we'll have far less of an illegal immigration problem in the state of California.
And if the feds want the illegal immigrants to have benefits, they should pay for it.
Right, or take them to Washington.
I think there's another point, though, here, and that is that that's easy to forget. But, you know, I don't think people voted to get the federal bureaucracy out of their face just to have a state bureaucracy put in their face.
That's right.
The biggest enemy of innovations in education today, Ben, are state bureaucracies that are wholly owned subsidiaries of the National Education Association. And it seems to me to pretend that there aren't serious problems in state bureaucracies to put your head in the sand. It seems to me that the revolution that Newt Gingrich represents and the Republican contract represents here in Washington also has to be repeated in the states. There are some states like California and Michigan and Massachusetts and others that are making tremendous headways on this, but you know, a lot more has to be done.
But no state on its own, you brought up education, no state on its own has yet passed a school choice voucher system.
Right.
No,
for
but-
private schools.
Voucher system.
But in California, as in Michigan, we do have charter school legislation allowing 100 schools. Now, in Pete's...
Within the public system.
But
not
the
within
enemy
private
of charter schools in almost all these states is the state education bureaucracy.
But I just want to make the point that in Pete Wilson's State of the State, he said that by 1997, the 11-volume, 7,500-page education code will be dismantled. He is getting rid of teacher tenure. He's going to bring in merit pay. He's going to empower parents to have control over their children's education. This is a very important step.
And those are all things that he says he can do without federal approval.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And this is going to...
If he can prevail on the state Senate and the state assembly.
Right.
And that's the way it should be. He doesn't
yes.
have to ask Mother May I to the Department of
Exactly,
Education
Phil. And
to do those things.
And education is the future of our country and of the state.
Jim Peyser of the Pioneer Institute for Public Policy in Boston, what is your sort of best example of what's the state's...
Well, you mentioned at the outset the Boston or the Massachusetts track record on Medicaid management. And essentially what's happened is they have converted virtually all of the Medicaid recipients into a managed care system. And under a managed care system, they brought essentially the inflation rate, if you will, down from almost 20% to under 5%. That's been done, had to be done hand in hand with the federal government. But there continue to be tongue wars between the Medicaid bureaucracy on the federal and the state levels over how to implement this program, how to determine eligibility, how to determine what's a reimbursable service. There are all kinds of things that continue to promulgate skirmishes. And the amount of time that's wasted focusing on these largely peripheral issues is immense, and the distraction for the state government is quite significant. So I think Medicaid is a good example of where there could be significant reforms and savings at the state level that, by the way, produce better benefits for those who are receiving the services.
Joe Overton of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, which is what, in Lansing?
We're actually located in Midland.
In Midland, Michigan. Tell me how your think tank works with Governor Engler. I mean, are you an extension of the state government in a de facto, or are you working with lots of different people? And has the governor adopted many of the ideas that have bubbled up from your operation?
We have a very good relationship with the Engler administration, but we are very much an independent, nonprofit research organization. The governor has been very receptive to our ideas. We've been out front on the issue of educational choice, charter schools, welfare reform. We have a quarterly Michigan privatization report. Privatization has been a key issue for the center. We don't view ourselves as a political organization. We view ourselves as an association of scholars who are building on the last 40 to 50 years of economic scholarship that points out that central planning just simply cannot work in a complex society. Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, Ludwig von Mises, these scholars and recent Nobel Prize winners in economics, I think you see a trend toward awareness of that. And that's what we're working to implement these policies in state government.
Jim Peyser from Boston, is that sort of where you come out on it all? How do you work with Governor Weld?
Well, we have, I guess, a couple of alumni who are current Weld administration appointees, and that certainly doesn't hurt in terms of getting our voice heard. But we are similarly an independent, nonpartisan group, and we're out there publishing books and ideas and promoting them independently of whatever the Weld administration might be doing, but we hope they're listening.
Is there cross-pollinization going on among these various state and local think tanks, which most people, I think, are sort of unaware of, but it's becoming a major force in American policy? Do you all talk to each other?
Yes, there's an organization called State Policy Network. There's an Atlas Foundation. There are a number of, just as the focus is moving away from Washington, the state think tanks do talk. For example, at Pacific, we copied the Pioneer Institute's privatization competition a couple of years ago, and in Governor Wilson's recent budget last week, he included 3 of our finalist proposals in his budget to privatize state services. So
that's really one size fits many. I mean, not all, but
right,
many,
really, yes.
Just as the state legislatures have their own organization and cross-pollinate.
And governors' organizations.
One size cropped here and there,
Yep.
cropped here and there,
Right,
without
no.
having to ask for permission, fits some.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note.
Let me just cut this off for a minute and go on to another area, which is sort of the problems that this might engender. If we allow each state to decide what to do about things like welfare, for example, would you not have what I guess the economists in the international trade arena call a race to the bottom? Because if you lower welfare standards, your tax rate gets lower, businesses say, oh great, we'll come in there, and then the neighboring state says, oh, we can lower welfare even more, and then you end up without any safety net, without any safety net for poor people. Now there are abuses in the welfare system, but I don't think anybody wants to really run it out of town, and isn't that the danger?
I think that's to vastly underestimate the people, at least in our state of Michigan. We have the opportunity in the state to lower many forms of benefits, whether they be in workman's compensation and so forth, and yet we continue, even though Michigan rates are out of line, and they're actually higher than surrounding states, we still find it difficult to muster the political will to bring those rates in line. I see no difference in welfare programs. People in Michigan want to help people. What they don't want is have their money wasted in a Washington bureaucracy or even a Lansing bureaucracy. They want that money to help people.
And I think if you look historically at welfare and Medicaid and some of the other programs, states have frequently added to the entitlement rather than attempted to take away from it. I think we may be seeing a swing of the pendulum in the other direction, but it's certainly not any evidence of a permanent resistance of states to all benefit programs. And I think different states react in different ways, and they're going to come to different equilibriums on these various issues.
I think that's an important point. I also remember we're a democracy. I mean, at the state level too, and we're a society that paid $3 trillion to keep the communists at bay. And made great sacrifices. We're a society that has paid trillions of dollars for welfare, which we now know didn't work. And I think we can't overlook the quiet destruction of people's lives that goes on with the current welfare system run the way it is. And sure, people are going to make some mistakes, but we live in a society that most of all, more than anything else, values human talent. And we can't turn our backs on human beings, not just because of our Judeo-Christian heritage, but also because of raw economics. And so I think you're going to see almost every state making major investments in their human resource base.
All right. Thank you, Sally Pipes, Joe Overton, Jim Peyser, and Phil Burgess. And thank you. We enjoy hearing from our audience, even when occasionally the correspondence is less than wholly salutary. One viewer commented on a remark I made during our program, The New Deal. How will Mr. and Mrs. America, Joe and Jill Sixpack, how will their life be changed? Joe and Jill Sixpack, really, you should be able to come up with better terms to describe average Americans with little regard. Gordon Matthews, Orange, California. Well, Gordon Matthews, I agree that was a mildly dumb statement. I do say a lot of things quickly, unscripted, unlike this response. That said, How about some alternatives? Given the rebounding economy, we could say Joe and Jill 12-pack, or given the remarkable nature of our audience, how about William and Wendy white wine? But please keep the mail coming. Email or snail mail, it helps us. Our address is New River Media, 1150 17th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036. Or we can be reached via email at thinktv@aol.com. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.